Good morning, everyone. I'm Brooke Shireman with Sanitation District number 1 of Northern Kentucky. And just for a quick background, uh, Sanitation District number 1 is a public utility, and we provide wastewater and stormwater services for areas throughout the 3 Northern Kentucky counties of Boone County, Kenton County, and Campbell County. So unlike a city or a county that would have these requirements within their ordinances, we have stormwater rules and regulations that pretty much function the same way. So when you hear me talk about rules and regulations, you can just kind of think of that as an ordinance for your community. So one thing we've seen for many years in our community, and I'm sure this is a problem that you see in yours as well, is stream bank erosion. And, this is a problem for multiple reasons. One, for our in-stream water quality and habitat, it can be very detrimental to those critters living in those ecosystems. Also, for property loss, when you've got that massive stream bank erosion happening, for some of our local stakeholders and landowners, that can result in significant loss of property. And then a big one for us is just compromised infrastructure. So with our topography here, and I think this is pretty typical through Kentucky, a lot of our infrastructure runs along our stream corridors, especially our sanitary sewers, because it's gravity. And because of that, as erosion happens, we can have exposed sewer pipes and manholes and roads falling in and other utilities that are compromised by that. So overall, it's a major issue beyond just the in-stream water quality and habitat problems. With that problem, we had to take a look at, was our current approach addressing this issue? And so over many years, in partnership with Sustainable Streams and others, we used our data that we were collecting in our stream systems, paired with some research that they were doing to try to evaluate our current stormwater controls managing for this critical flow in the stream. So when I say critical flow, I'm talking about the flow that stream system can take, the volume of water, the velocity of that water that can move through that stream system without having those erosional forces take place. Now, some erosion we know is natural and needed, but the prolonged erosion and, a great deal of it is what was causing our problems. So we needed to find out, okay, are we addressing this issue with our current requirements? And I think these are slides you all have probably seen quite a bit in past KSA presentations. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but if anybody does have interest in some of the background of this info, please feel free to reach out. So with the slide on the left, what that's showing is with that 0.8 inch water quality requirement that took effect with our stormwater general permit, we're managing up to that 0.8 inch for our service area. That's that 80th percentile. We were also doing regional flood protection. So that's that pre and post peak matching that was mentioned earlier. So that was for the 2-year storm event and on up. But what we were finding is there was a chunk of storms that we were not managing between those two approaches. And a lot of the storms that we were seeing in our area were taking place within that time frame. So that was one issue. A lot of these events that were causing these problems, we were not managing for them with these existing requirements. And then looking at the hydrograph on the right, what we were seeing too is although we were peak matching with that post-development control, so that peak control detention that you see there in the green line, although we were bringing that back down to pre-development conditions, you can see the amount of time that was over what our critical flow was, which is there with the dashed line, was elongated. So that means that these forces at work on the stream banks were occurring for a prolonged period of time. So that kind of answered our question. We needed to make a change to really address this issue. So through that research, what we found is that there was a kind of a simple regional approach that we could take to this. So instead of doing more complicated sediment transport modeling for every single new development site, what was found was that if we looked at those smaller storm events, so everything going up to that 2-year event, if that maximum discharge was less than 0.4 CFS per acre of that drainage area, we were getting to that critical flow stream target. So that was just one modification, as you can see in that table there, of our overall design requirements. And that was something that was actually, upon looking into that and how that was going to translate out into what it looked like in a B&P in the field, for the most part, this was a simple modification of the outlet control structures for, detention, retention, extended detention type basins to manage to that level. So we had to figure out, how are we going to implement this approach? And once we became aware of this, it required a lot of outreach. And this was very much targeted to those stakeholder groups. So we're talking about the development community and the engineering community that is doing the design of these BMPs. So for many, many years, there were presentations to the Northern Kentucky Society of Professional Engineers, the development community, the Building Industry Association, that was, formerly known as the HBA, the Home Builders Association, our co-permittees, cities and county officials, citizens, our watershed groups, our stormwater advisory committee, and then at other realms too, even beyond our regional area, but in state and national conferences, because it was important to get feedback on a broader area to make sure that what we had in mind made sense and there weren't other concerns there. And then we started with just requesting it and incentivizing it. So before it became a hard and fast requirement, we had our project design engineers, when plans were coming in, to look to see if these modifications could be made and making that request. And with that alone, about 85% of our projects that were coming in were able to make that modification. And then we also incentivized it. We have a stormwater fee credit for non-residential properties. So if they met that requirement at the time, they could get a 40% credit. So with all of that initial planning, incentivizing, outreach, then it was time to get it into our rules and regulations. So we have a section in our rules and regs, and this is kind of like what Matt was talking about before, but on a different topic. We've got a section that says additional controls or localized restrictions may be placed on specific sites as deemed necessary. So at the time, instead of making the full change within our rules and regulations and adding the Q critical requirement, we decided to kind of point to this and implement it by notification to our development community and through the plan review process. And that was because we knew there were going to be a lot of other updates that needed to take place within the rules and regulations. And that was going to be, pretty time consuming, take a few years. And we really needed to get this requirement out there so our new development could start managing their stormwater in this way. So we did a notification in July of 2015. The requirement took effect in 2015, but we also had some expectations with variance and waivers too, as we were, starting to implement this process. So then it was important, though, that we got the details into our rules and regulations. So we fully revised our rules and regulations. They were accepted in June of 2020 by the Kentucky Division of Water. And that is when we put the specific requirement in our actual, development requirements within those rules and regulations. And those are two examples there of how that looks in our current rules and regulations. So overall, there was kind of, I think, a lot that we learned with this. One being the importance of that education and outreach on the front end. I'm not saying there wasn't pushback. There was. But the fact that we did a lot of that up front, especially with the design engineers, ended up helping us a great deal, because then when there was pushback, we had some design engineers who had gone through the process and they were actually able to say, hey, look, it's not that big of a deal. It's this minor modification we made on our outlet control structure. We didn't have to, enlarge the basin by a great deal. This is something that's doable. So having that come from them and not just us held a great deal of weight. So that was a really important component. The other thing was the local examples. So like I mentioned, there was that kind of requesting period. So we were able to get this implemented in a few areas to have as examples at that time frame. And our watershed groups, we've got some great watershed groups in our 3 counties. And they actually did some of this implementation too. And it was so nice to have actual projects to point to. So that was really helpful. Another item on here that's related to this, but just kind of in general, the importance of record drawings and as-built, as part of your permitting process. We had it on the books as a requirement for some time, but those things weren't always collected as part of the NOT process. And then we found out how important that was. And that's just, make sure you've got something in there to cover you on that. That can be really important, no matter what your requirements are, that you have that as part of your permitting process. The other were clear and specific requirements. Like I said, it was great that we had that additional controls language in our rules and regulations that allowed us to act a little quicker on this. But ultimately, getting that into our rules and regulations with the details has been helpful, especially for any kind of new development or design firms that come into the area that aren't familiar with it. It's clearly stated in our rules and regs now. And also with the development of a standard detail for extended detention basins, that helps achieve this in a way that hopefully minimizes some of the maintenance that could occur with those smaller low flow orifices that you need to achieve that critical flow. Another thing we found out, we're seeing a lot of extended detention basins now. And I think one reason for that is because you can get that water quality volume and meet Q critical within the same BMP. So that's something we've seen kind of happen over the years since we've implemented this requirement. And then also another big help for us was the incentives through the credit policy. And we've updated our credit policy now. Since this is a requirement, we can't really incentivize people to do what they're supposed to do, but we have additional items in the credit policy now for maybe developments prior to this requirement. If they do retrofits to meet Q critical, they can receive stormwater credits, or for new developments that go above and beyond. So maybe, beyond the 2-year storm, but to the 5 or 10-year storm, managing for that critical flow can receive a credit as well.
There was one question in chat, and Richard Walker asked, is the 2-year design storm for Q critical the 2-year 24-hour storm?
Yeah, so it's up to that. And that's why we made that modification in the table for that 0.4 CFS. And there is more detail in that in our rules and regulations. And I know kind of short on time. So you can definitely reach out to me too, and I can give you a little bit more detailed information for the reasons behind that.